I've always enjoyed the Runaways music. I always thought it was just simple, fun, easy rock and roll songs that, granted, sounded kind of creepy because I knew that the people in the band were pretty young. I never knew just how young they were. I thought they were like 18 to 20. Had no idea they were like 15. But even still, you can kind of just chalk that off to like the ethos of rock and roll being this rebellious music for teenagers and just say like, okay, sounds a bit weird, but just enjoy the fun rock songs. It wasn't until I started digging in and researching for this video that I learned just how dark many aspects of it was. The Runaways broke the ceiling and opened the door for a lot of women in rock and roll, but they did it at great personal cost. This is the story of the Runaways. If you end up enjoying this video, consider giving it a like, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss out on more stories from music history. Also, I'm sorry if I sound weird or pass out in the middle of this video. Apparently I have COVID, so we'll get through it together. Joan Larkin was born in 1958 in Pennsylvania to a father who was an insurance salesman and a mother who worked as a secretary. By the age of 13, now living in Maryland, she got her first guitar and attended a New York Dolls show. The New York Dolls really inspired her and showed her that all rock and roll really takes is having the right attitude. She started taking guitar lessons but quit pretty early on because the teachers wouldn't let her play what she wanted to play. They told her that girls don't play rock and roll. And then when the family moved to the Los Angeles area, that allowed Joan to start branching out and really finding her own creative way in the world. Around that time, her parents divorced and she started going by Joan Jett because she said that sounded more rock and roll. She used to tell people that it was her mother's maiden name, but she, in recent years, has come out and said that that wasn't true. She was super inspired by the artist Suzi Quatro, who helped her see that women could be successful in a band. She said in an interview with Louder Now, quote, "Once I got to LA, I had an idea that I wanted to be in a rock and roll band, an all-girl band, serious about playing. I read about this place in Hollywood that catered to teenagers playing British music that never made its way over here." End quote. That was a place owned by Rodney Bingenheimer, and it was a really cool hangout spot for rock musicians of various levels of success. And it was there that Joan met Carrie Crome, who was a girl about her own age who had started writing songs. Carrie introduced Joan to Kim Fowley, and that's when things really started to roll. Kim was born in 1939 in Los Angeles and already had a really long track record in the rock and roll business. He worked as a writer and a producer on a number of early rock and roll songs, and before he met Carrie and Joan, he had an idea to start an all-girl rock group. So when he met Joan, things just started to click. Actually, before he met Joan, Kim met another girl outside of the Rainbow Club. She saw him in the parking lot and she knew who Kim was and knew his background in the music business, so she went up to him, introduced herself as Sandy West, and said that she was playing drums in various bands in the Huntington Beach area. So when Kim met Joan, he connected Joan with Sandy and the two started jamming and just really gelled well musically. Sandy Pesavento was born in Long Beach in 1959, and she got her first drum kit from her grandfather when she was 9 years old. She started playing violin first because she wanted to be like her sister, but she ended up hating that instrument, and she loved the drums far more. She played in her school orchestra, but her real love was always rock and roll. By the time she became a teenager, she was already playing in local rock bands, being like the only 13-year-old invited to some of these high school parties because she was in the band. She was 15 when she met Kim Fowley in the parking lot of the Rainbow and started jamming with Joan. Joan and Sandy knew that they had stumbled upon something and they were pretty serious about it, so they immediately started auditioning other people for the band. They ran through a few bass players, including Mickey Steele from the Bangles, but none of them stuck. Sandy said in Backfire magazine, quote, "So we were advertising for bass players. Now suddenly Lita Ford comes up, auditions for bass," end quote. Lita Ford was born in 1958 in London to a British father and an Italian mother. When she was still pretty young, her family relocated to the US, settling in Long Beach. She started playing guitar when she was roughly 11, and she fell in love with metal bands, especially Deep Purple. Lita said in an interview with Decibel, quote, "It was like it was embedded in me even before I started playing guitar, because I knew I wanted a guitar. It's just something that's in my blood. I liked the way music made people feel. I was really drawn to that," end quote. When she came to audition for the Runaways with the idea of playing bass, she also brought along her guitar. So during a break in the audition, her and Sandy bonded over their shared love of Deep Purple and just started jamming to some metal songs. Lita immediately hated Kim Fowley and didn't want to work with him, but Joan and Sandy basically begged her to join the group. But she fit much better as a guitarist, so the band still needed a bassist. That's when Kim brought back Jackie Fox. Jackie Fuchs was born in 1959 in Los Angeles. She played some music with friends growing up, but never really took it all that seriously. She was focused on academics and actually earned early admission to study mathematics at UCLA. Jackie was always something of a misfit, though. She was really interested in doing the stuff that people said girls shouldn't do, like playing guitar, surfing, and she even took a shop class. She really wanted to find a group of other misfits like her that she could fit in with. As a 16-year-old in LA at that time was inclined to do, she was hanging out at some of the local clubs when Rodney Bingenheimer, who already knew about the band that Kim was putting together, saw her and approached her about potentially auditioning for the group. Jackie recalled in an interview with Tripod, quote, "I was dancing at a Hollywood club called Starwood one night when Rodney Bingenheimer asked me if I played an instrument. I said, yes, I play guitar, and he introduced me to Kim Fowley, who arranged an audition. Turned out that the band needed a bass player, though, so I borrowed a bass from a friend for the audition. When I got accepted to the band, I switched from guitar to bass," end quote. And then talking with Huffington Post about her decision to join the band, Jackie said, quote, "The Runaways represented this freedom. I hated being in the box, be here at this time, do this at this time, do it this way. I just thought it would be better to speak my mind, sleep a little later, hang out, and meet rock stars," end quote. I say that Kim brought her back because she had auditioned previously for the guitar and didn't mesh well with Sandy and Joan, so she wasn't asked to join the band, so they brought her back in on bass. The timeline gets a little bit confused depending on like what source you're following or who you're listening to. People remember things differently, so it's kind of hard when you're looking at this early formation of the band to really figure out who joined when and where and what was happening. So that's just kind of the best I could do. So let me know in the comments if you have better information about like when Jackie joined, when Lita joined, when those auditions happened. It's just all kind of mixed up depending on who you ask. Jackie said that first night when Rodney introduced her to Kim, he actually took Jackie up to Kim's apartment, and Jackie got a really weird feeling from it. She said in the movie Edge Play, quote, "When I walked in, it was just this tall freak with a disaster of an apartment and just this very overwhelming presence." So with Joan, Sandy, Lita, and Jackie, the band was almost complete. They just needed a singer. So Kim was on the lookout, and he was hanging out at a club with Sandy and Joan when he found the perfect person. Cherie Curry was born in 1959 in Encino, California. Her mom, Marie Harmon, was an actress during the golden age of Hollywood, best known for starring in the Western film The El Paso Kid. Marie's second marriage to Donald Curry resulted in 3 kids, son, Don Curry, and twin daughters, Cherie and Marie. Cherie wasn't really all that interested in music at all when she was growing up. She didn't play an instrument. She wasn't a singer. But Kim saw her out at a club called the Sugar Shack and immediately locked onto her as his potential frontwoman because she had the look that he wanted. Kim had gotten really into that kind of like David Bowie aesthetic, and Cherie kind of looked like a teenage girl version of David Bowie. According to Cherie, Kim actually approached her twin sister Marie first, but Marie thought he was really creepy and turned him down. But then once Marie turned him down, he asked Cherie, who initially was kind of hesitant because she never saw herself being in a band. She told Backfire, quote, "When I recognized Joan, I was like, wow, Joan had her leather jacket on. As soon as I saw Joan, I knew I wanted to be in a rock band," end quote. Cherie realized that being in a rock band could be a way to get some attention and step out of her sister's shadow. She said in the movie Edge Play, quote, "You know, my twin sister was always the prettier one. She was the cooler one. She always had all the friends. I was the meek twin, the runt," end quote. They asked Cherie to come audition, and Kim told her to select a Susie Quattro song to audition with, since the girls in the band all loved Susie and could play pretty much all of her songs, so Cherie picked one and went to the audition. It turns out that the song that Cherie picked, none of the girls knew how to play. So Joan and Kim sat down to write a song that Cherie could audition with. That song ended up being Cherry Bomb. Joan told the New York Times, quote, "Kim and I went in the other room, and he said, just start playing me something, play a riff. I started jamming on the Cherry Bomb riff, and he started with the chorus, hello daddy, hello mom. I'd say 20-25 minutes we came back and said, sing this. It was great to be in that creative process, happening right there for a specific person, end quote. Before we really get into the next part of this, let's pause and talk about something really quick. You might be thinking, this sounds kind of weird, right? This grown man is scouting, recruiting, hanging out with these 14, 15, 16-year-old girls with the intention of making money off of them. I mean, the way that he finally convinced Lita to join the band was selling her on this vision of extreme success and playing to sold-out arenas with everyone knowing their name. So he always had this intention of, like, exploiting these teenage girls. Exploiting might be a strong word, but I think it's an accurate word based on what happens. And you might start feeling like that's a little bit creepy to consider this grown man, who I think was in either his late 20s, even in his 30s, looking at teenage girls in that way. And you'd be completely right. It is creepy and it was weird, and I don't think we should excuse it just because their music happened to be pretty good. And the way he went about preparing his new band for success didn't make it any less weird. He said he was in the military and he loved the boot camp aspect of military, so he treated their early rehearsals like a boot camp, with him as the drill instructor and the girls in the band as the recruits that he needed to whip into shape. He'd shout at them and berate them for doing stuff wrong. They had these things called heckler drills, where he would throw things at them and yell at them while they played to prepare them for the possibility of potentially encountering that in the future. It all just sounded really intense and brutal for a 15-year-old girl to be going through something like that. Despite the fact that he very clearly did, Kim claimed that he didn't actually put the band together. He said, quote, I didn't put the Runaways together. I had an idea, they had ideas, we all met, there was combustion, and out of 5 different versions of that group came the 5 girls who were the ones that people liked, end quote. Which, if you're paying attention, is a really vague statement that doesn't actually mean anything. I'm sorry, I normally try to be like unbiased and objective and just tell the story, but I really don't like Kim Fowley. I mean, this is the guy who put a personal ad in the newspaper that said, quote, if you are 18 and like it, or if you are under 18 and legally emancipated with paperwork, then you may have just stumbled upon the opportunity of a lifetime. I demand a blonde, blue-eyed sex dog, end quote. Yeah, all my friends hate Kim Fowley. He's just whatever. We'll get back into the story. Kim said that he treated the band less like a musical endeavor and more like a sport. He even compared the girls to like Wonder Woman at one point and had the intention of toughening them up. But all that really did was create this atmosphere of super intense jealousy and competitiveness. And the girls didn't have each other to lean on because they saw themselves as competing against each other. And then things definitely got darker. Remember Carrie Crome, the lyricist that we talked about earlier, who introduced Joan to Kim? Well, she was essentially Kim's personal lyricist. Kim paid Carrie $100 a month to write songs for him. Some of those ended up becoming Runaways songs. But eventually he started abusing her. Kim said, quote, in his mind, he thought he was having a relationship with me, like a romantic relationship. He didn't care what I thought about it. He just decided, end quote. Kim was 14 and 15 when this happened. He also let the band party all they wanted, supplying these 14, 15-year-old girls with all of the drugs and alcohol they could ever want. And while all of that was happening, the band was trying to figure out how to be coworkers with each other as 15-year-olds. Lita was really outspoken and rebellious and loved pushing back against authority in any way she could. Her and Jackie were constantly getting into fights, but Lita was also super dedicated to this idea that Kim had sold her, this idea of being the biggest rock band in the world. Kim controlled almost every aspect of the way the band was perceived, and he really leaned in to the whole jailbait selling point. In the movie Edgeplay, he seemed really excited that their primary fans at the beginning were mostly older guys who thought these teenage girls were attractive. He influenced what the girls wore and even sent Cherie to a choreographer so she could learn how to swing the microphone between her legs. And on the back of their first album, he listed the girls' ages next to their pictures, which could be seen as a way of saying, look how talented these teenagers are, but once you know kind of who Kim Fowley was, it definitely feels way more sinister than that. That first album was recorded in 2 weeks because Kim said he wanted a more raw sound, but he also didn't think that Jackie was good enough to actually play bass on the album, so they hired Nigel Harrison, who was the bassist in Blondie. Kim said in the book Queens of Noise about recording that first album, quote, "It worked because I wrote most of the songs with somebody. Everyone's first album is always the one where they don't question authority. Rock and roll was a dictatorship. Somebody has to say, this is how we're going to do it." End quote. Mercury, their label, promoted the band as like the New Stooges and released their self-titled debut in 1976. It definitely wasn't a success. It peaked at number 194, and people really didn't know what to do with it. As AllMusic critic Alex Henderson said, quote, "Women had no problem becoming folk rockers, singer-songwriters, or top 40 icons, but female artists who had more in common with Led Zeppelin and Aerosmith than Joni Mitchell were hardly the norm. This LP was far from a commercial hit in the US, where timid rock radio programmers simply didn't know what to make of the Runaways." End quote. From day one, the band was always pushing against the stereotype of girls not being able to play rock and roll. Cherie said in The Guardian, quote, "We knew we were going into unknown territory. We had to fight on a daily basis, especially with a lot of male bands who didn't take us seriously." End quote. She also told the Financial Review, quote, "Susie Quattro had cracked the door open for us, but the Runaways still had to push our way in. We did that with 3 chords and an attitude that we belonged up there on stage." End quote. And Joan Jett said, quote, "I thought we wouldn't have a problem because rock and roll was all about freedom. I was really wrong about that. I really don't understand where the hatred came from." End quote. After their first album came out, they immediately left on tour to support it, where they mostly lived out of Motel 6s and survived off of McDonald's. And they quickly found out that they didn't exactly fit into this male-dominated rock touring world. In most of the small clubs they played in, they had to use urinals because the clubs just weren't prepared for female performers. Or, as Joan told the New York Times, they would use solo cups. She said, quote, "I'm just in my dressing room with a cup, quick, easy, you don't have to go anywhere. Try it next time. Solo cup. Check that solo cup before you drink." End quote. It was during that tour that Scott Anderson became associated with the band. He joined as like a kind of manager, even though Kim Fowley was still controlling every aspect of the group. But all Scott really did was spend all of the band's money, keeping them well stocked with drugs and alcohol. But Scott was kind of a nerdier looking guy. He wasn't nearly as imposing of a presence as Kim. And since the girls in the band were all feeling really exhausted by the abuse that Kim put them under, they gravitated towards Scott as this kind of protective parental figure in their lives. The band felt safer with him. Cherie actually thought that they were in love with each other. Jackie Fox said in the movie Edge Play, quote, "I walked into rehearsal one day and everyone else is there. They're all sitting up on the stage at the front, and the instant I walk in the door, Kim looks up and just yells at me, 'Did you sleep with Scott Anderson?' And I said no. There was a moment of dead silence, and then Kim said, 'Well, you're the only one who didn't.'" Allegedly, Cherie got pregnant during her relationship with Scott Anderson and had to get an abortion before their second album. So these teenagers were not only dealing with intense sexism in the industry that they were trying to break into, they were also dealing with the male authority figures in their lives, just exploiting and abusing them. It's a really hard, dark situation for them to be in. And you add on to that all of the drugs they were taking, all of the alcohol they were drinking. It's a wonder that they even survived this period in their lives. During that first tour, Cherie and Lita started to fight a lot. According to Lita, Cherie didn't take the band seriously enough. Lita was super focused on the music and making the band the biggest it could be, while she said that Cherie got distracted by partying and drugs and boys and just that rock and roll lifestyle. As Jackie told Tripod, quote, "The most negative thing about being in the band was not being taken care of by the people who were supposed to be looking out for us. We had a terrible record deal. We sometimes went for days on the road without getting fed very much, and our managers really set us against each other. So instead of being sisters to each other, we ended up fighting a lot and competing for the spotlight." End quote. It was also during this early period of the band that one of the darkest moments in the Runaways story allegedly happened. In 2015, Jackie alleged that Kim Fowley her after a Runaways gig in 1975 at a party in front of a whole bunch of people, including Cherie and Joan, who did nothing to stop it. And I'm sorry that I gotta censor that word. YouTube is not going to be happy with me saying it, so sorry about that. Carrie Crome said, quote, "Jackie was dead drunk, like corpse drunk. She was just laying down on her back, sound asleep, out of it. He had to manually move her body parts into positions that he wanted for himself, end quote. It's worth noting that Joan and Cherie don't exactly agree with Jackie's version of those events. Joan said in a statement to Billboard, quote, "Anyone who truly knows me understands that if I was aware of a friend or bandmate being violated, I would not stand by while it happened," end quote. And her representation basically just told them to talk to Jackie about it, since it was, quote, "a matter involving her and she can speak for herself," end quote. Cherie denies that it happened the way Jackie says it did. She told Louder Sound, quote, "I was in the room that night, but what I saw was a giddy, high little woman who was telling Kim what to do to her every step of the way," end quote. But Kim's reputation was really well known in the industry, and people who knew him pretty well, including the guy who wrote his obituary, believed that it happened. They said it sounded like something Kim would do. Apparently, it was a really open secret around the industry at that time that Kim Fowley liked younger girls and was not exactly the nicest person. It's a really dark, horrible situation. There's a really long Huffington Post article that you can read if you're interested in learning more about what happened and hearing Jackie's story. These allegations came after Kim passed away, so he wasn't able to speak for himself or share his version of events. It sounds crazy to say that he should have a version of events. She was 16 or 15. There is no his version of events. Whatever. It was also during this time that Cherie's father started to get a little bit concerned about Kim Fowley and what this grown man was doing around these teenage girls. He started asking questions and getting more involved, which Kim really didn't like. So Kim turned the other girls in the band against Cherie and basically pressured Cherie into confronting her father and telling him to back off. The band was slipping further and further into drugs and alcohol and resentment towards each other. They said that there were basically two sides of the band. It was Lita against Cherie, and the rest of them would kind of float back and forth between the two of them. Plus, Jackie said that the other girls in the band all knew what happened to her, and they all chose to ignore it, which made her feel even more isolated and alone in this a traumatic event that happened. They brought all of these emotions into the recording of their second album, Queens of Noise, released in January of 1977. Kim was less involved in the production of this album, and instead they hired Earl Mankey, who had worked with the Beach Boys in the past. Since the band was so splintered at that point, the actual recording process was pretty tough. But after that album, things started to really pick up for the band. They had much larger crowds, much more fame. They were positioned within the new emerging punk movement, so they often played with bands like the Ramones and the Dead Boys. Sandy said in an interview in 1995, quote, "It was fun, but it was a lot more to handle. Each year got more intense," end quote. They were especially big in Japan, so they went out on a mini Japan tour. But it was during that leg of the tour in Japan that Jackie felt more and more overwhelmed by everything that was happening. There were certain points where Joan had to beg her to not leave the group. The final straw, at least according to Jackie's story in the movie Edgeplay, came when her really special bass wasn't taken proper care of, and it fell off of the guitar stand and broke. When that happened, she snapped and got really angry. She went back to her dressing room, started throwing things around, broke a glass bottle, and then used a shard of that glass to start cutting herself until Cherie broke her way in and basically fought her to stop her from doing it. After that moment, she realized she had enough and she quit the band. Jackie said in Edgeplay, quote, "I don't know who I am anymore. I don't like myself. This is going to kill me. And I just quit," end quote. Jackie went on to do quite a few interesting things in her life. She became a modeling agent. She became a motivational speaker. She worked on the business side of music. She even got a degree from Harvard Law, where she was classmates with Barack Obama, and now works as an entertainment attorney in Los Angeles. And she's also a Jeopardy champion, so things are going well for her. The band finished the Japan tour with Joan playing bass, and then when they got back home, started auditioning other bassists. They only tried out a few of them before they found Vicky Blue. Vicky Tischler Blue was born in 1959 in Newport Beach. She had played guitar in a few other local bands, but a friend let her know that the Runaways needed a bassist, so she decided to audition. She told Legendary Rock interviews, quote, "When I joined the band, had literally just got back from Japan that week. I auditioned and got the gig, and we instantly started writing for the new album, which was Waiting for the Night. In addition to that, we started doing a lot of rehearsing, 5 days a week, 8 hours a day," end quote. In the midst of this new whirlwind, Vicky was struggling to fit in with this band that had spent years being exploited by the adults in their lives and doing all of the drugs that they could possibly find. As Lita said in Edgeplay, quote, "By the time Vicky joined the band, the Runaways were out of their minds already. It was hard for Vicky just to jump in and fit in because we were lunatics by that point," end quote. Even though emotions were wearing very thin and the band desperately needed a break, they jumped right back into rehearsing and preparing for a new album. Cherie said in an interview with The Guardian, quote, "Either we were touring, rehearsing, or in the studio, and we were making no money at all. They were making a lot of money off of us," end quote. During one photo session, Cherie had to leave a little bit early because her and her sister were sharing a car and Marie needed the car. That got Lita really angry, so she started screaming at Cherie, accusing her of not taking the band seriously enough. That was the final straw for Cherie. She quit the band on the spot. After she left, Cherie tried to start a solo career. She even worked with her sister for a little bit. By her mid-20s, she realized that her drug use had gotten completely out of control, so she managed to get clean, and she worked as a tech in a drug and psych ward, helping other teenage girls get clean. Since 2002, she's been mostly working as a chainsaw artist. She told Vice, quote, "Now I've done thousands of pieces, and that's been my sole livelihood for almost 15 years. But back in 1977, the Runaways are in the middle of recording their third album, and now they need a new singer. Instead of going through a whole audition process, they just appointed Joan as the new singer. But Joan felt kind of insecure and uncomfortable in this new role as a frontwoman. This was one of the few instances that I could find in this Runaways saga where the members of the band rallied around each other to support each other and make Joan feel comfortable in this role. One other good thing happened in 1977. The band finally fired Kim Fowley. They brought in as manager someone who had worked with Blondie and Suzi Quatro in the past. For this album, they hired John Alcock as a producer. John was much more of a metal fan. He leaned darker and heavier, which is exactly what Lita and Sandy wanted, but Joan was far more interested in glam rock. So this division kind of pitted them against each other as well. John really didn't like Joan. Joan also didn't think that Vicky was good enough and didn't want her on the album, so Vicky just quit the band and Lita played bass. That album, called And Now the Runaways, released in 1978, and it's largely seen as a forgettable release from them. The band was all but over that point, and the performances were kind of lackluster. After the album came out, the Runaways broke up. That breakup hit Sandy the hardest. She said in Edgeplay, quote, "I was a part of looking out for these girls and watching them grow up and growing up with them. So when all that ripping and tearing went on, my heart was ripping and tearing. And that's when you find yourself feeling lost." End quote. Things also didn't go well for Sandy post-Runaways. She slipped deeper and deeper into a drug problem and got arrested for it. She did start the Sandy West Band and did some solo work, but none of that was doing enough to support her financially. So she mostly worked construction. She worked as like a vet tech for a while too, but she also alluded to doing some pretty illegal things in order to just get by and survive. In 1997, they almost got the band back together. Everyone was on board, but Lita refused. Cherie told Metal Rules, quote, "I said, please do it for Sandy West, Lita. Do it for Sandy." And she wouldn't. And for that, I will never forgive Lita, because Sandy really, really could have used a boost. End quote. Lita told a radio station about her decision, quote, "Nirvana was just kicking in, and it was really bad timing. It wouldn't have worked. People would have just turned their nose up at it." End quote. In 2005, Sandy was diagnosed with small cell lung cancer. She died in October of 2006 at the age of 47. I've said this before in other videos, but I'm just going to say it again here. This is a video about the Runaways. I'm not going to talk much about their careers post-Runaways. There's a whole video that can be made about Joan Jett and the Blackhearts. There's probably a whole video that can be made about Lita and her metal career, but we're not talking about that. We're just talking about the Runaways. So let's just briefly hit on what happened. Lita Ford became a pretty big name as a metal guitarist during the 80s with her solo career managed by Sharon Osbourne, but by the mid-90s, music took a back seat to raising her sons until her music comeback in 2009. Of course, Joan Jett has continued to be a massive force in rock music. She founded her own record label after being rejected by almost every other one and started her own band, the Blackhearts, and she has been inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So that's the story of the Runaways. There were a lot of talks about reunions and rumors about all of that. The different members have played with each other at different points. I think Kim Fowley, before he died and finally rid the world of his ilk, he reconciled with Cherie somehow and stayed with her for a bit. So there's more that can be getting into post Runaways, but this video is long enough. I wanted to focus on the Runaways career. Let me know what you thought using the comments below. Let me know if you also hate Kim Fowley. I hope I don't get like sued by any Kim Fowley representation that's out there. All of this is alleged. I don't know. This is what I've heard. Just cover my bases there. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video and subscribe so you don't miss more stories like this from music history. We've got a cool opportunity coming in September, so subscribe so you don't miss out on that.